In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan Caruso sits back down with Foundry Group's Seth Levine for part 2 of their conversation. Seth takes us inside the formative chapters of his journey, from grinding through 100-hour weeks at Morgan Stanley during the telecom boom, to witnessing the rise and collapse of early competitive carriers, to negotiating deals with the likes of Enron at the height of its power. He shares the stories that shaped him, his leap into ICG and First World, the chaotic dot-com unwinding, and ultimately the experiences that set the foundation for becoming one of Colorado's most influential venture investors. Dan and Seth revisit the origins of Foundry Group, reflect on community building, and look ahead at what might be next for Seth as this chapter of his career evolves. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Seth, this is our second Bear Roars podcast.
I can't believe you invited me back, Dan. It's amazing.
Well, we've done a couple part 2s before, but this one's different because our part 1 was a different type of podcast. It was you and I together talking about the history of venture capital in Colorado.
It was super fun.
Yeah, and it was
in front of an audience.
In front of a live audience, and one that I know a lot of people gave me feedback that they really got a lot of value out of that conversation that we shared together. So yeah. Thank you for that.
I had the same feedback, and I appreciate it. It was actually I don't usually re-listen to stuff that I record like that, and I listened to that one, and I thought it was excellent. It was really
nice.
Good. Really good.
But this one is going to be different. This one's going to be more about you and your journey. But your journey has a couple different chapters to it. One part of the journey is as a venture capitalist. We'll cover a lot of that. But another part of the journey was really how you got going, which is where my world and your world overlapped. Now, it didn't overlap in terms of us actually, even knowing each other in those days. But the kinds of things you were doing in those years was in parallel with what I was doing, which was all around bandwidth, fiber networks, competitive telecommunications, and some of your journey brought you to places that I eventually kind of bounced into as well.
I'm excited to share some of those stories. I'm sorry we didn't overlap. I would have loved to work for you.
Well, you would have been the first one who loved to work for me.
There you go.
People get a lot of value out of working for me, but I never hear too often. Well, that's not true. A lot of people, certainly they'll reflect that it was the best working experiences of their lives. So I get that quite a bit, and both in terms of not just what they learned and how they developed and how we developed together, but also what was accomplished. So there were certainly lots and lots of good years working with lots of interesting people. So yeah, we would have had a great time together. But let's talk about kind of how you ended up in the telecom world. And when was it that you first started to encounter competitive telecommunications?
I mean, you got to go. For me, I got to go all the way back to college. This will make sense in a second. So let me get all the way to it. I went to college in the Midwest, not Chicago, but in St. Paul. Okay. And I was going to be
St. Paul, Minnesota?
St. Paul, Minnesota, yeah.
What, that's considered the Midwest?
It's driving distance from Chicago. We used to go there for the weekends.
I usually think of that as, I think of Midwest as, I guess maybe Iowa. So I guess I think of Ohio.
If you ask someone from Minneapolis, St.
Indiana.
Paul, they definitely think they're Midwest.
Okay,
no doubt about it.
I think of them as North.
We used to spend. Well, that's true. No, now they branded it the North, right? Yeah. So I guess that's true. But I don't know. I grew up in Boston. I thought of it as the Midwest.
Well, you think all of us are Midwest?
Certainly, my parents,
Boston.
Everyone I knew thought of it. They were like, "Where is that?" I don't think they could have found St. Paul on a map. So I'm at school in St. Paul. I'm a psychology major. I thought I was going to be like a psychologist. Like I was going to go to grad school in psychology. And I was taking a bunch of econ courses because they were interesting to me. And then my junior year.
What in econ was most interesting to you?
Theoretical economics. Literally didn't take a single finance class. Did not at all take a finance class. I just thought I took a lot of like international trade, comparative economics, macro and micro, like that stuff I was super interested in.
So here's my big question. How do economists feel now that they know how wrong they've been over the last 20 years?
All the time, right?
Not just all the time, but in such a profound way, because all of us, I'm not an economist, but every economist I know and every business person I know has talked about how much debt this country's taken on, and if we just take on a bit more, we're going to collapse and this and that. All of us would have guessed in terms of how much debt and deficit we've accumulated that our economy would have come crumbling down. We would have guessed that 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We're guessing again now. Yet the economy just keeps doing just fine. So
Yeah.
I haven't heard a single economist ever say, you know what, we could afford to take on a monumental more debt and a monumental higher deficit, and we'll be just fine. Yet it seems like we haven't so far.
So good. Knock on wood. Two answers to that. One is I was actually like there's this really interesting marriage now. It wasn't really at the time between psychology and economics, right?
Yeah.
Richard Thaler comes to mind. He's doing a podcast tour right now because he's got a reprint of one of his old books. Daniel Kahneman, Tversky, people like that, and they were just starting to talk about how actually economists believe that everyone's a rational actor, but actually no one is actually a rational actor. So that's one answer, right, is part of that. And then the second answer is economists, of course, love to assume there's that old joke about a whole bunch of people getting stuck on a desert island and they've got like a can of food and, you know, the physicist is like, well, we'll just like harness the sun's rays and we'll be able to open the thing. And the chemical engineer is like, well, no, we'll take some salt water from the ocean and we'll be able to distill it down and we'll be able to corrode the food open. And the economist is like, you're making this much too hard. Assume a can opener. And so I think that's the other answer.
There you go.
So anyway, so I'm in college. I think I'm going to go be a psych like professor, basically. And a bunch of things happen. I won't go through the whole story. My summer of my junior year, and I didn't get this internship that I had applied to that I was like super sure I was going to get, and therefore had made zero backup plans. Not a good idea for anyone listening. And so at like the last minute, I went and worked for Chubb Insurance Company. They were late getting going. They came to campus. I don't know what I was going to do because I didn't have like enough money I had no plans. I did not have money to I guess I was going to work at like the sub shop. And so, but anyway, got this job at Chubb Insurance, and it was the first time I'd ever made. I probably made like $3,000 that summer in 2 months, but it felt like a lot of money to me at the time. And I was like, that's interesting. And then a couple other things happened my senior year. I was like, you know what? I don't think I want to go do that. I think I'm going to go do something else. And so I end up.
What was interesting about the Chubb Insurance internship? Any memories about really?
Well, I mean, there's a couple. Like one, I was pretty clear I did not want to be an insurance salesperson, but I liked the business environment, Dan. I'd really never had. My dad worked for Digital Equipment Corporation, and my mom ran like an institute for principals at Harvard for a while, and then she was a private head school for kind of the end of my high school career and into college. So through that I'd had a little exposure, but not like a lot of exposure to what business was like. And I kind of liked it. I worked downtown in a big office tower in downtown Minneapolis, which is a beautiful, it's a beautiful downtown. They've got this huge skyway system. It's summer in Minneapolis, which was kind of nice. And I had a great set of colleagues, and I really enjoyed it. I knew insurance wasn't for me, but I really liked kind of the pace of being in business. And I liked the reality of it. I mean, since you asked, I'll give you a snippet of the actual story, which is there were these two back-to-back lecturers my senior year, very, very early in my senior year. And one was this like super high, sort of high end, like there was a name for it. It was like some lecture series that we sponsored at the school. And there was a big dinner and this big thing. And it was a Northwestern professor who came to talk about something that had to do with the welfare state. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I'm sure it was something soft like marketing if it was from Northwestern.
It was super soft, actually, and this is part of the story. Is that like she said at the very beginning of her speech, and we're in this sort of main chapel, which is the main lecture area at McAllister where I went to school, and it's filled to capacity, 400, 450 people, whatever it is, and again there had been this big dinner. It was like a big deal, and she says at the beginning, she's like, hey, when we get to the end, I'm going to give you a practical idea, like what can we really do? She talks all about this stuff around welfare states, things like that. And then she gets to the end and she has this like ridiculously unpractical thing. And she said it and I was like, that can't possibly be it. Like that can't be it. So that was a little disillusioning. And then like 3 nights later, this woman came who had been on welfare, had written a book about it. And I was thinking to myself, like, and she was speaking in the chapel. And I was like, this is perfect, right? Like here I heard this not particularly interesting academic talk about it, but I'm going to go hear someone who's like actually experienced this and can tell me like, what was it really like? What were her ideas? What worked? What didn't work? How should we think about, not having people in it, whatever. I thought it would be really interesting. And I show up and it was like me and 10 people. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to spend my life in the 400-person room. I want to spend my life in the 10-person room. Like, I want to be with the people that actually are like experiencing the thing, not the people that are pontificating about the thing, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I look, I have a deep respect for, academia, and I love my college. I mean, it's not about that, but it just like, it was not for me. But the juxtaposition of those two things. So I decided, no, I'm going to, I like the Chubb thing. I think I'm going to try business. So I end up calling, or well, not even calling, I ended up getting in touch with a McAllister alum who was at Morgan Stanley. And at that time, Mac was sending maybe 1 or 2 students a year, graduates a year, to Wall Street. But I had sort of lucked into this econ major.
Yep.
Because the secretary I'd spent a lot of time in the econ department because I was into these econometric stuff, and I didn't have a computer that was powerful enough to run any of the models. So I had to go to the lab all the time. And so I was very friendly with the people around, not going to surprise you or anyone listening who knows me. And so one day the department secretary had put a piece of paper in front of me, and she says, if you take basic financial accounting your first semester senior year, you will be an econ major. And I was like, I don't know. She's like, Seth, I've already signed you up. You're going to take BFA.
This would be good for you.
And you're going to be an econ major. And so I was an econ major. So I had, even though I hadn't taken any finance, I had a little bit of sort of ability to, talk around it. And I'll never forget it. I had my finals for the first semester. I flew home to Boston, where my parents lived at the time, on whatever day it was, someday in December. The very next morning, I flew to New York, because I had through this Mac alum, and he did like a offline interview thing, and they had sent me a note saying, hey, if you happen to find yourself in New York, you're welcome to interview. And I was like, of course I'll find myself in New York to interview at Morgan Stanley. And so I had arranged this day or whatever. And so I flew the very next day to New York. I think it was 8 interviews. Turns out the third interview was the interview where they decide whether you can have the rest of the interviews. Because they were like, well, they're going to meet with 3 people. And then after the third interview, they were like, hey, could you stay a little longer? And so I had 7 or 8 interviews that day. And then I went home, and when I got back in January to I lived off campus at that point, to my apartment, I had a letter from Morgan Stanley offering me a job. Anyway, so I get this job, and they place me in the telecom group. Which is
a big deal in that era, because it's kind
there was
of like the AI group right now. It's where all the money was being spent.
Absolutely. I don't know how I lucked into that, because now I understand there was like this super hierarchy of recruited schools, and there were only, I think in my analyst class of 115, there were, I think, 8 of us who didn't go to a recruited school. Yeah. All of which were schools I couldn't have gotten into.
Yeah, all the Ivy League schools.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I luck into this telecom group. And so I get exposed to this whole world, right? And so it was really data, and it was like telecom and media. They were kind of together. And I was on the telecom side. I worked for this guy named Chris Harland, who's, was a long time sort of senior banker in telecom. And it was the perfect timing, right? So I show up, it's the summer of 1994. And all these competitive local exchange carriers are issuing debt. And
there's lots of it,
tons of it, right? There's lots of
tiny fraction of what the AI companies are.
It's funny to think about it now, today. Right? But back then it was a lot of money.
Gigantic.
And, I ran all these models. I mean, the first thing I noticed when I was running all the models was, and this is all, we didn't call it junk debt, but we would call it junk debt in vernacular, but it
high yield
debt. Yeah, exactly. But that if you added up all the market share numbers in all of the, for all of the CLECs, like the total market was like 300%, right? And that's what the competitors were going to take from the incumbents. So it kind of, you could sort of tell maybe it wasn't going to all work out, but we raised a ton of debt at Morgan Stanley for all of these different telecom companies, and we did a couple of equity raises and things like that, and one of them ended up being ICG.
Before we get into ICG, what other names do you recall that you worked on, either on the debt or equity side?
We took Trescom public. That was my first big public roadshow. It was a Florida-based. I'm sure they went out of business by now. That was the funny thing about that roadshow was I was a second-year associate at that point, and I think they thought they would get me in trouble by buying like expensive wine at dinner and stuff like that. This is why they went bankrupt, because obviously we were billing that back, and I didn't care. I had a Morgan Stanley credit card. I would just charge it, and they were like, "I hope you don't get in trouble for this, $2,000 bottle of wine." I'm like, I'm 22 years old. I've never had a $2,000 bottle of wine. Like, I think we'll be good. We're okay.
Client friendly.
It was very client friendly. That was a fun roadshow. That was really fun. I'm sure I still got pictures somewhere of that. But yeah, we did stuff for them for WinStar, for a bunch of stuff in Florida. I should remember all the names. I mean, name a CLEC and we probably did it. Not
Yeah.
level 3, interestingly. I didn't work on any level 3
ITG
things.
back then, I think it was in Florida. They were all they all had 3-letter initials
Yeah.
and
SCC. There were a bunch of
Yeah.
them, and then of course, we also worked for a lot of the Bells, right? So I did a bunch of work on Bell South in particular, which eventually the Bell South treasury guy became the CFO of ICG and was a super helpful person in my life and my career. But also AT&T. I remember at one point we did this like poison pill analysis for all these big companies, and we were trying to basically describe to AT&T why we didn't think that they could ever be taken over, right? A couple years before they got taken over. So, there was a bunch of fun stuff like that. And also some smaller ones. So CenturyLink, which has now become a real sort of a bigger player, right? And we did a couple things around work with them, which was also pretty interesting.
Yeah, because just to fill in a couple gaps for people who are listening in, let's just cover a few of those. AT&T, which gets a lot of coverage by story bandwidth. AT&T was one of the architects behind the rules in which divestiture was going to happen, in which competition was going to be introduced. So they thought they set the rules up to be in their favor. They'd be one long distance entity, and then they'd have all the baby bells. And it turned out they left themselves most open to competition, and they ended up struggling in a significant way. So they brought in kind of a new CEO, Michael Armstrong, after a botched CEO search process, and he had the grand plan of restoring AT&T back to its greatness. So they, in a relatively short number of years, they went from zero debt to a significant portion of debt, and they used that to become the biggest cable TV company, the biggest cellular carrier. They bought one of the biggest local fiber companies in the early competitive era. They started building long distance networks in competition with the level 3s and the WorldComs of the world. And they even had a big international venture called Concert with BT.
Yep.
So they thought everything was on a great track. But in all of those areas, the walls came crumbling in. And eventually, as you said, they left themselves vulnerable and were acquired. So the AT&T we know of today is not the AT&T that started that journey. A different company bought them, actually wanted the baby bells, and then took their name and branded themselves as AT&T. So that was a real interesting story that you would have been part of.
It's also a story of it's creative destruction. I guess if you're in the industry, it was positive creative destruction. If you're in AT&T, it was very negative creative destruction. But they had this cash cow in their long distance business, and it never occurred to them that was going to go away, and they just watched it go away over time with MCI and Sprint and others who got into that business. I mean, it's really interesting. And by the way, we did some stuff also in wireless. McCaw Cellular was a client of Morgan Stanley's way back in the day, Craig McCaw,
and that ended up being acquired by AT&T.
And got acquired by AT&T. And then we did some international as well, in particular Millicom, which will eventually bring us back to ICG, because that was Shelby Bryant's company before he eventually got hired by ICG. So it was a really interesting time, and it was.
And then just one other quick story: CenturyLink you mentioned. CenturyLink was a small rural, telephone company, independent, never part of the AT&T system, down in Louisiana, if I remember right, Monroe, and they ended up during the whole telecom kind of meltdown process. They did some acquisitions of other rural ex that eventually led to them buying Quest, which had ILEC property from the old U.S. West. So now they buy Quest while Quest was going through its struggles, rebranded to CenturyLink, and then that company then buys Level 3, my former company, which had done a bunch of gobbling up itself. Now it's rebranded as Lumen.
Right.
So I think of Lumen as the extension of Level 3, but really it was the extension of CenturyLink, although there's a bit of a reverse merger there, because most of the people running what was the post Level 3 CenturyLink were the Level 3 executive team, but both those are just big, crazy stories.
Oh, and just amazing stories about how it's the same thing as AT&T, right? The smaller player ends up sort of working its way up and ultimately becoming the parent. I also think of Lumen as this successor to Level 3. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting to sort of think about how all those things happen. I happen to know US West reasonably well because when I was at Morgan Stanley, we did the tracking stock, which was essentially like a way of taking a part of a business public for it was US West Media, I think is what they called it. And so, and I remember being in that room, with like 40, 50 other people, and just, I mean, it was kind of nuts. And that happened really fast. Like we did that tracking stock deal. I say we, I mean, I was like in the back room on a computer on like Lotus 1-2-3 modeling the stuff out. But that happened.
How was it
being series of
being?
months?
Because when you're a banker, work for one of the big banks, and certainly in that era, I mean, you're working really hard. I assume you were just working all the time, traveling probably quite a bit, but probably learning an immense amount in a short period of time. What was that lifestyle like in working for a bank early in your career?
Yeah, it's funny to call it lifestyle because I had neither life nor style, right? I mean, it was, investment banking in that time was, I mean, I think it still is a lot of work, right? I mean, I was regularly working 90 or 100 hours a week, sometimes more, right? I mean, so that it just like you start adding it up, it just doesn't leave a lot of time outside of that. But what I think about, I mean, what would be
and that's not an exaggeration.
No,
either.
not at all.
I mean, literally, you're showing up early in the morning and you're staying until you're ready to go sleep at night, and you're working Saturdays, you're catching up on Sundays.
It was a 7-day-a-week job. What I used to do when it was nice out are the Morgan Stanley offices. When I first started, were in Rockefeller Center, and then we moved to the current Morgan Stanley building, which is the big building in Times Square that has the 3 ticker tapes that sometimes you see on TV. So we're whatever the Times Square building was at 48th, 46th, something like that. And so we're 15 blocks, let's say, from Central Park. And so on Sundays, I was always working. So I'd go to the office, and then at some point on Sunday, I would take my rollerblades. This is again the sort of spring, summer, fall. I would rollerblade up to the park. I'd rollerblade around the park. I'd come back to the office, and that's how I decided 1 week from the next week. Right? So like my weekend was rollerblading around the park, and then I got to come back. But the interesting thing to think about is like what was the kind of work that I did, right? A lot of what I did when I was in investment banking, I think got outsourced, right? So, there was no internet in the way that we think of it at the time. In fact, when I was at Morgan Stanley in the group next to ours took Netscape public, which is considered, that was 95, was considered kind of the start of the internet age, right? That was Netscape had created, this is Mark Andreessen, had created initially Mosaic, and then that was when he was in college.
At the University of Illinois Engineering Department?
Should have said that.
Yes.
Chicago-based. But was the first real internet browser, so you could actually browse the web as we think about it today. And so that didn't exist. So like when I wanted to go get a 10K or a 10Q for a company, I had to go down to the library at Morgan Stanley.
Wow.
We had this huge CD-ROM array. And I would grab a disk that was like the directory disk, and I would put it in the computer. I had to look up the company and whatever document I wanted. It would give me some number AB325, and then I go pull that CD ROM out, and I put that in the computer, and then I'd print out whatever that thing was. And so every quarter we do the the comparables. And so we would go down, and I'd spend, 6 hours in the library printing out all of the 10Ks or 10Qs of the companies that we tracked. And then I'd bring this, usually it'd take me a couple of trips, bring this huge stack of paper upstairs, and then I would have to go through all of them, and I'd put them in. We weren't on Excel. I was on Lotus 1-2-3, and we would put them into these big spreadsheets. Or like, if I wanted to do, there was no PowerPoint. We didn't even really actually have a visual word processor. If I wanted to like create a graph for a presentation, I would write the graph out, and then I'd walk upstairs to our graphics department and I'd fill out a form because it had to be charged.
Remember those plotters?
That's terrible. Oh my God! Yeah, and it would take forever to print one page, right? And inevitably they'd get something wrong, right? Because my handwriting was bad or whatever. And so an hour and a half later, I'd get the graph back, and I'd be like, that's 4.3, not 4.1. And so I'd have to like mark it up and then put a new cover page on it and fill that out and then hand it back in. So like that was a lot of what I was doing until kind of all hours of the morning. I mean, but a lot of it was also just like when I wasn't up in the art department, was sitting behind the computer and modeling out, different companies, 5, 10-year plans, right? And debt coverage ratios and all that kind of stuff. Again, always from scratch, all on Lotus 1-2-3.
Mm-hmm.
It's good times.
No, it's crazy.
Really good times.
Now all you got to do is press a button, tell ChatGPT to, not just go find it for you, but to summarize it and do whatever you want. And 5 minutes later, you're done.
It both makes me incredibly happy, but also a little sad that, other people don't have this experience, because it was like such a seminal experience of like figuring all this stuff out. And I was not a finance major, so I had to like learn all this stuff. And it was, fortunately for me, I had some really, really good associates, which is the next level up from analyst, who kind of help walk me through all that kind of stuff, because it was like, I didn't know. When I started at Morgan Stanley, we had a 3-week training thing where they teach you all about how Morgan Stanley does stuff. And one day they're talking about DCF. Like, here's how we do the DCF. And Morgan Stanley had this, they called it the mid-year convention. All it is they take the DCF and they move it up by half a year, and that makes everything slightly more valuable. And so therefore they can justify a slightly higher price. And I was sitting there in that classroom and I was like, I am so screwed. I don't even know what a DCF is. And again, this is pre-internet. So it's not like I can go on the internet and be like, what is DCF finance? And I had like an accounting textbook that they had given us. And I spent that night just like, I was like, all right, what does DCF mean? And I'm pouring through it, found discounted cash flow, which is what it means. And then had to like teach myself that night, like what it was. I certainly wasn't going to go and ask someone else. Like, I already was like, I probably shouldn't be here. I'm only one of 8 people that didn't go to like Harvard, Yale, Brown, whatever. And I don't want to prove them right by being like, what's a DCF? And then they're all going to be like, yeah, you're going to get fired before you even start. So it was an interesting.
There is such a thing as a dumb question, and that would have been a dumb question to ask in the environment you were in.
Yeah, in that context, absolutely a bad idea. So, and of course, the other interesting thing, speaking about sort of random terms, but like, and you know this from being in the telecom industry. Oh my God, if you have a 4-letter word, you need to shorten it to a 3-letter acronym, right? I think everything had an acronym, and so like it just took a while to figure out what all this stuff meant.
Yeah,
but it was fun. We got to visit a lot of data centers and a lot of interesting operation centers. Obviously met a lot of really, really interesting people who were, senior at many of these companies. I'm sorry we didn't bank level 3, because it would have been great to meet the folks behind that. I suppose, it was really MFS at that point, because probably level 3 was really founded right as I was leaving Morgan Stanley. But
yeah, because it was really 96 that MFS sold.
Yeah.
So what led to you leaving Morgan Stanley, and did you go directly to ICG at that point, or what was your next step?
I did. I went directly to ICG. So I had a great experience at Morgan Stanley, and they made me an offer to stay, which was great, right? I think they made, 5 people in my class an offer to sort of like skip business school, stay as a banker. They call it accelerated career path. And if you do that, you do a 3rd year as an analyst, and then you're an associate. And they were going to put me somewhere in Asia, and it was a pretty interesting idea. And so I was kind of going to go do that. And then what actually happened was one of the analysts in the group next to me, 22-year-old guy, had a heart attack. And I just thought, like, you know what? This isn't really for me.
Yeah, because it is to survive in that lifestyle for long periods of time.
It's hard, right?
Yeah, it's not like you do that for a couple of years and things kind of level off. It just keeps going and going and going.
100%. My closest friend at Morgan Stanley is now a vice chairman. There's a few of them of Citibank, and I just he's still, when I call him up, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm in Tokyo, but I'm in wherever. I'm in Hong Kong tomorrow, and then I'm going to Australia." And I'm just like, this doesn't sound like a fun life.
Accounting, well, being a corporate lawyer was that way too. Certainly being a consultant. Of course, being an entrepreneur in the tech era, that was, I don't know when we ever didn't work.
Yeah, it's a good point, but a different kind of work, right?
Yeah.
And you at least a little bit feel like you're sort of working for yourself, or
yes, for certain.
Felt different. But so anyway, I was like, you know what? I think I knew I didn't want to stay in banking. I think I want to move to Colorado. My dad grew up in Colorado. I'd spent all both my grandparents on his side of the family were born in Colorado. My family's been here since the late 1800s. And I'd spent all my summers here. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to move from New York, I want to make a big change. And I want to move to Colorado. So I called up Shelby because I'd done a lot of work.
And this is what year?
This is 96.
Okay, so we're going to come right back to that in a second, but I want to put some context for the people listening. So that's 96. In 2004, I led the buyout of ICG. So that's 8 years later. And when I led the buyout, it was a public company, but it had already gone through bankruptcy, and it was about ready to go into second bankruptcy. So I ran it for 2 years and then ended up selling most of it to Level 3 and other pieces to many other companies. And so the ICG story is near and dear to my heart. And a lot of what you're about to share is going to be new to me because I kind of, even as I was writing the book Bandwidth and needed to tell ICG's story, it was hard to find that early information about ICG. It just, I searched and found bits and pieces and was able to pull it together, but not in a way that gave me a really clear picture as to the origin story of ICG and the circumstance in which Shelby Bryan came in. So this is going to be lots of fun for me and hopefully lots of fun for people who are listening to this as well. So tell us about the ICG that you joined in 1996.
It was super interesting. So when Morgan Stanley started working with ICG, it was because Shelby had come in to run the company.
And who's Shelby? Tell us who Shelby Bryan
sort of very flamboyant. The first time I saw him, he was wearing this like seersucker suit, and he was kind of a dick, right? And I remember I met him, and then I must have walked out with one of the other associates, and I was like, "Who's the asshole in the seersucker?" And they're like, "Oh, that's Shelby Bryan, Millicom." And he had taken this international cellular company public, and I think he hadn't even joined ICG at that point. I think he was thinking about joining ICG, and he had come to, I guess, Chris Harland, my boss, or really my boss's boss, but who ran the telecom group at Morgan Stanley, to ask him, what do you think? Or, what can we do here? Can we raise debt? And, Shelby had a really good reputation.
Yes.
And so, so obviously the answer was like, yeah, of course you can raise tons of debt, and you should absolutely do that.
And if you want to think about what Shelby looked like by today's standards, would you agree that Gavin Newsom might be a good analogy?
Yeah, a little blonder, right?
Yeah.
But he kind of had that slick back hair, and
a little taller than
taller,
average.
Very slick, it turned out, Shelby was, as it turned out, very nice to me. He was a dick to me too, but he was as nice to me as I think he is to basically anyone. Mm-hmm. And also for context, he was not dating her at the time, but he ended up being the longtime, partner, I guess, of Anna Wintour.
Yeah.
And I think that started at some point while we were all at ICG.
And while she was with her former husband.
And while she was married, that too as well. But he's that kind of like charismatic, whatever guy, right?
Yeah, probably fills. I don't know that I've ever been in the same room as him, but kind of guy fills up a room with his personality.
Here's just he once said to me, he was married also, and he didn't wear a wedding ring. And he said to me, it's actually worse to not wear a wedding ring, because when you are hitting someone, when you're traveling and you're hitting on someone at the bar, it's just better if they know you're married, and then it's not complicated. So that's a glimpse into Shelby.
I'm gonna have to think about that one. That's simple.
I don't know. So anyway, so Shelby shows up at ICG, and we end up banking ICG at Morgan Stanley. And that was like a series of junk bond issues. And so I end up, and it might have even still been called in Telecom Group at the time, right? First it was Denver Teleport, right? Yep. It was a couple other things, and then it sort of came together as in Telecom Group. And so I was traveling a ton with all of the senior management. And my job as an analyst was to do whatever they wanted, right? And so, and that was like carrying bags, and I'm saying this part of the story for a reason I'll tie back to later, but I got a lot of coffee for these guys. And obviously like prepped them for meetings and gave them, helped them run their financial models and things like that. They didn't have a very big like group of analysts. Essentially, they had one guy who was amazing. He was fantastic. Actually, Dan King, who you might know from Colorado, from the Boulder market. He was fantastic, but he was like the only guy running models at ICG at the time. And so I was helping supplement that, but I spent a lot of time with these guys. So in 1996, when I'm ready to leave Morgan Stanley, so the analyst role, it's a 2-year job, right? So everyone's leaving unless I think maybe one person ended up staying the year that I left and did the ACP. So I called up Shelby because I knew him and I'd spent a lot of time with these guys, and I just said, hey, I'd really like to work for you. I'd like to move to Colorado. Do you think you have a job for me? And he said, I mean, again, he was very kind to me, even though he was kind of a dick sometimes. He said, absolutely, someone's going to call you in 5 minutes. And someone called me, Sheldon Oringer, who I maybe met a little bit, but didn't really know him at all. And he said, hey, Seth, it's Sheldon Oringer. Shelby says you're going to work for me. So let's talk about what that's going to look like. And so they made me an offer. It's funny. I remember negotiating that offer, and Sheldon was kind of pissed about it, or he pretended to be pissed about it for a while. And then after I got there, he was like, I'm glad you negotiated, because I figured you're going to have to negotiate on behalf of ICG for this role. So if you had just accepted the offer, I was going to rescind it right there. And I was like, all right, I guess that's good.
Let me ask you a question, both when you're as a banker and then in your early days at ICG, how often did people really care about what the financial models were revealing? And by people, I mean the executives and even the bankers, versus it was just a check the box. We need a financial model. It needs to have certain characteristics. Let's make the financial model look like it's going to create a lot of value. So how often was it just an exercise that was part of the process, versus how often would you come across someone who was really using the financial models to provide meaningful insight as to whether a business plan or a major investment was penciling in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between care, understand, and maybe sort of want to believe, right? I think Dan King was excellent and completely understood on a product level basis. Mm-hmm. And Dan and I ended up being kind of counterparts, so we sort of both worked on this stuff together. I absolutely understood what was making money and what was not making money, and conveyed that sort of. And again, it wasn't. I mean, it was a big company, but it was in the finance part of the world. It wasn't a huge company because there weren't a lot of us. We had direct access to Shelby and other people. Shelby himself was not around a lot, right? He was out raising money. He didn't live in Colorado.
And he didn't even come to Colorado very often.
Not a ton, right? I mean, he was, he just wasn't around a lot. I don't know what meetings he was having and, how much he was pouring through whatever.
I'm sure he's on a lot of Zoom calls, right?
Back in the day.
Which is fun, because it wasn't like when we say we use Lotus 1-2-3 instead of Excel, it was still a spreadsheet software, but there really wasn't, like video conferences equivalent.
Oh my God.
You have to go in a big room, and you would rarely, if ever, do that. So
not at all.
Maybe you're on audio conference calls, but people didn't work remotely in a effective way by today's standards. That's just, the technology didn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, when Shelby would come into town, it was like a hurricane hit, right? Because we'd all have to scramble to, sort of try to have some of these conversations with him. But I mean, having seen the models of most of the competitive local exchange carriers, I've got to believe that people either were suspending disbelief, which is probably what it was, right? Wishful thinking, hey, we're going to exceed our plan. This is, the markets really need this. They really want this, and or a certain amount of just people weren't that facile with spreadsheets and numbers, because it sort of, none of it really held together from my perspective.
Yep.
But, I think when I first showed up, I don't know that I knew that, right? I mean, I showed up and they wanted to, we were obviously, I was in, I guess I ran corporate development. I guess Sheldon ran corporate development. I worked for him. That was how it worked at ICG. And, but they wanted to do a bunch of like M&A deals. And they were like, oh, Seth, you were a banker. You should do the M&A deals. And I tried to clarify that I had been in the corporate finance group at Morgan Stanley, not the M&A group. And they were like, no, you're good. And so we did a series of M&A, including a big one when we bought Netcom, right? If you remember that back in the day. Now, and I think things like that made sense. Like the rationale of like, how do we extend from telephony into data communications? Like that absolutely made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Whether Netcom was the right company to buy or not, I don't even remember exactly how that came about. But the big deals in those days, especially public to public, because Netcom was public. I mean, that thing happened like over a weekend, right? I mean, it was a long weekend. I didn't sleep at all, but it happened really, really the negotiation around that happened really, really quickly. It was funny because we'd done some smaller acquisitions that I had led. And I was very fortunate that we had a lawyer who's unfortunately since passed away, but Rob Mintz, who was a real mentor of mine. He just taught me how to do deals, right? Because Sheldon was sort of more of a big picture guy. Again, another person who was incredibly kind to me and really good for me and my career, really believed in me. But he was kind of a big picture guy. So he'd sort of be like, okay, this is kind of what we should do. And I think this is the price. Seth, go get it done. Yeah. And obviously getting it done, like a merger agreement, as you know, can be a couple hundred pages, right? Like there's a lot of nuance to getting a deal done. And thank God I had Rob Mintz to be like, okay, here's how you do this. And this is what this means. And so we did a bunch of deals, right? I mean, we bought, 10 or 15 companies at ICG while I was there running the corporate development group. We did a bunch more debt. And so I kind of floated. I didn't really work for the CFO, but the CFO was I was really close with because he lived really near where I lived. And I was, 23, 24 at the time. And he and his wife would have me over for dinner at least once a week. And Sheldon had me over probably 3 times a week. So I had these like really close relationships with these senior executives at ICG. But, there's it's every company. There's all this sort of like little bit of infighting and we had a few different divisions and, who really, to your question, like who was paying attention and who really understood what was going on and how are we going to make our numbers? And, we're this public company because the ICG had done this reverse merger into a Canadian shell public company to become public on the Vancouver exchange, right? Which is not the exchange you ever want to go public on.
That's probably why I was having trouble finding the information about it going public.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's how it went public. It went public via reverse merger into this Vancouver shell. And then eventually was able to cross-list in the U.S. But like, again, it's just like if there was like a weird roundabout way to do it, like ICG did it. And in the meantime, we're building this crazy building. My very first, I didn't even officially started. I showed up to Denver in August of 1996. I had flown to Minneapolis. My best friend and I had driven out from Minneapolis. ICG had rented me a corporate apartment in like suburbia Denver, which is not great when you're 23 years old. And my very first, not my first day, but my first sort of going to an ICG thing was I went to the groundbreaking for that Death Star building that we eventually built, right?
The hull of a ship facing westward.
Yeah, leaning over the highway.
I-25, yeah.
Crazy.
The most important building in my career, because if I didn't figure out how to
how to sell it, right?
Really how to work out a deal with the owner of the building that was carrying it for $80 million of debt, that I was able to make the case to him like, why don't we just reduce the rent by 2/3 and instead of a 20-year lease, make it an 18-month lease? They said, okay, because if you don't do that, it's all going to be tied up in bankruptcy for years, and you don't want to do that, do you? And they struck a deal, and that's what really was the enabler of.
Did you work in that building?
Yeah. I mean, as we were during that 18-month, wind down process.
That's probably longer than ultimately I worked there because I left ICG in maybe '99, and I worked there for a while. I mean, it must have been somewhere between 6 months and a year, but
I would go once or twice a week. I was living here, and
fair enough.
I had a small office here that I was using, but I'd get down there a couple times a week.
That's a long ways away, but it's kind of a cool, imposing building. Yeah. I mean, I sort of I have these weird feelings every time I pass it. I usually don't drive down that that far south, at least that often. But but when I go by,
big emotional
it's crazy
tug. The level 3 campus that meant a lot to me. That I wasn't part of building it out, but I certainly was, an executive of the company as we conceived of and built it out, and now it got auctioned off in a process that no one bid. So it's still sitting there trying to be sold and has been, I think, completely abandoned. It's like, oh man, there were a lot of examples like that. Wiltel went down that path and, didn't work out well. And 360 Networks built this massive
Of course,
facility
yeah.
out in Europe, and there's lots of those big
Everyone
mistakes
thought they had to have this like really huge network operations center. So we
Yeah.
would build these buildings, and the ICG building, at least when I was there, had this like crazy big knock
Mm-hmm.
with all of, like, these screens were so unnecessary, but it had like, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet by 50 or 100 feet. I mean, just huge wall of screens that were like, I mean, you
And
could
everyone
see
would
the
look at their
network on it.
computer.
But yeah, but everyone's like looking at the thing right in front of them. Like, you didn't need like a 2-story atrium,
Yeah.
size network operations center, but that was what everyone built because they thought that that's what investors wanted to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. So I was, I mean, my time at ICG, I remember it fondly because it was.
How many years were you there?
I was there for like 2.5, maybe almost 3 years,
Yep.
something like that. I learned a ton. And they were really good to me, right? So I came in at a director level, and I was at least 10 years younger than the next director. This is back to the coffee story. The group that, because I knew all of the senior executives, they had a little plaque made for me for my desk, and it said, Seth Levine, Senior Director of Coffee Procurement. And
Try doing that today.
yeah, seriously. But I actually, I like telling that story because I sometimes tell it to young people. I'm like, you kind of have to be willing to do anything. And I think part of why they were happy to give me a job was because I actually was fine going to get them coffee if that's the thing that needed to be done at that moment. And obviously they didn't hire me because I could go get coffee. They hired me because they thought I could do M&A deals and things like that and model the business. But I saved that. I still have that.
Oh,
and
nice.
It means a lot to me because I feel like, and they meant it as a joke, and everyone showed up, and the first day they would come, and I had an office too, which was nice of them. And every one of them, all the senior managers, from the CEO down to the CFO and all the chief, general counsel, everyone else, they all came by and gave me their coffee orders as a joke that morning. And it was a kind of a fun way to get welcomed in, but like a reminder that, like, look, you do what needs to be done, and that's how you get in people's good graces, right? And like, Shelby wanted to be the most important person in every room he was in, and I was happy to let him be that and make sure he knew that I thought he was. And I got we used to do these, I should have brought some of these for you to see. We used to, because I actually saved some of this stuff. When I was still at Morgan Stanley, we finish a deal, you do a closing dinner. And they were usually like relatively at least for me, relatively fancy dinners at like a nice New York restaurant. A couple times we would do, I think for some ICG ones, we actually did one out in like Beaver Creek or something like that. It shows you how much money Morgan Stanley had made off of ICG, because it was paid for by the banker. But one of the things that the analysts got to do was do a little roast of everyone. And so I would do these roasts of each of the people that were on the roadshow, essentially. So, the CFO, CEO, et cetera. And I had a couple of funny ones for Shelby, which I've saved. So
Shelby strikes me as someone who wouldn't be as patient for humor directed toward him as a lot of others might be.
Yes, and in that situation, he had no choice, because it was like, and I think there was a little bit of him that respected it, because I don't think a lot of people push back on him. Yeah. And I wouldn't have done it other than I was in this particular context that was like,
that was
okay,
your role.
It's acceptable to roast everyone, so we roasted everyone.
What was your last year at ICG?
I left ICG. So I'm trying to remember if I think I left either the end of 98 or the very beginning of 99.
So that would have been before things really started to heat up.
Yeah,
although ICG was one of the very first of the bigger ones to go into bankruptcy, if I remember right.
They were one of the really big ones, but that was a couple years later. But I went to work for another telecom company, right? So Sheldon left ICG to go run, I think at the time, I'm so sorry about this name, it was called First World Communications. And it was basically based in Orange County, but he was going to sort of restart it here in Colorado, and he hired Dave Gandini, who had, I don't know if he'd run sales, but was like a senior sales guy at ICG. Incredible character, great guy, like kind of crazy Italian dude, but fantastic. He'd hired Gandini, and then me. I was the third person who got hired. And I was essentially...
So it's called First World?
First World Communications.
Did it change it into a different name?
It changed to Verado.
Verado, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also a terrible name.
Verado's not bad.
I guess it doesn't mean anything, so it's
Yeah.
way better than First World Communications,
Yeah.
which was terrible.
I like Verado.
Oh my God. And maybe I just have. Well, I mean, again, it was all good for me, right? I mean, I wasn't trying to.
And what
I
was
was learning,
Verado's?
right?
What was Verado's plan?
Well, they had been when I joined, they were a CLEC operating in Southern California,
Okay.
and they wanted to expand into datacoms. And so I joined, and then I was reporting to the guy who was the head of corporate development, who reported to Sheldon. And I don't think I'd be exaggerating. 5 days in, Sheldon called me up and said, I can't remember what the guy's name was, but I fired such and such. I just don't trust him. You're going to report to me and run corp dev. And I was like,
And you're what age at this point?
25, maybe?
25.
Maybe I think I just turned 26. Maybe I was 26.
And this would have been at, pretty much at the peak of when, the craziness. It hadn't hit the peak, but it was getting.
Yeah.
If this was 99, this was getting.
It's getting
about
right
as
there.
Heated up as as it was.
And we went on this acquisition. So for starters, so there's some context here that's important. So Don Sturm from MFS was a big investor in First World. He was already investor when I got there. So he's our board chairman. And we had done some deals we're starting to do some deals with Enron where we had leased dark fiber from them, and so they were the other big investor in First World.
Oh wow!
And part of my role as head of corporate development was a couple things. I mean, we were doing a bunch of deals with other energy companies because a lot of them,
Dynegy perhaps,
all of the above, like everyone you can imagine.
Williams
in particular, because Williams just had a huge pipeline. And so what these energy companies were doing is they were laying fiber alongside all their rights, their rights away, because they had the rights away and they were like, hey, fiber should probably be important, right? Williams, in their case, Williams turned it into an actual business. In Enron's case, they just wanted to lease the fibers out. And so we had a series of negotiations with Jeff Skilling, who later went to jail. Ken Lay, who we'd met, but he wasn't like day to day.
So let's pause for a second because when we think of Enron, we think of an energy company. We think of a gigantic disaster. But what you and I know is that Enron, one of the biggest contributors to their implosion, was getting in the fiber business, getting into the bandwidth business. With the notion that they were going to be bandwidth traders, they were going to set up exchanges, but they were also going to accumulate hard assets, fiber in the ground, and use that as kind of their barter to get other fiber and do trades and all kinds of stuff. And all of the characteristics of Enron, the smartest guys in the room, that was on full display in their bandwidth trading world.
It was in full display when you sat down. I can only imagine what Skilling probably thought, having to sit down across the table from me and work out some of the details of some of the stuff. They thought they were the smartest guys around. 100%. And they were constant, and this is why this stuff kept coming up, because they're constantly trying to trade this or that and recut this and that. I mean, it was.
So tell us about Jeff. Both your personal impressions of him when you spent some time with him, and then also kind of who Jeff was in the broader sense.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff was sort of so Ken Lay was the CEO. Jeff was his key lieutenant.
Yeah, and Ken was an older statesman type.
Yeah.
In some respects, perhaps, liked to be at the chairman level. He liked to not know things that he wasn't comfortable knowing. So he probably did know them, but he was operating kind of, as more of a political, handler,
100%.
figurehead, relationship guy. Skilling was the guy running the show,
executing the deals, right? So, and I only met Lay once, and that was my experience of him. It was brief. I think he didn't really understand who I was or why I was even around, and I don't even know that he was sort of there to shake Don Sturm's hand or something like that. It was not to get into the weeds of anything. Jeff was pretty aloof too, by the way, right? He was not. We never went out to dinner. We never that was not. He was not going to go out with someone like me at my even though I was a relatively senior level, but I was a young person, and so he didn't have any interest in that. He was very much can we get in? Can we get this done? He was always impatient. Always seemed to have somewhere else that he needed to go. Constantly stepping out for calls. And I was never quite sure of how much of that was an act, because we're negotiating a little bit. and how much of that was just him, but he kind of struck me as aloof would be the kind way to say it. Kind of an asshole.
Who else was involved? Any other names from the?
Not from their side.
No.
Yeah, I'm sure there were other people, around, but I mean, he was like, everyone was deferential to him, right? I mean, it was so clear that he was the guy, right? So everyone else was kind of sitting a little bit further back, and it was interesting. I mean, Enron was a big investor in First World, and like that mattered. And I don't know who cut that deal. I think the original investment happened before I showed up, but we kind of reconstituted that.
Well,
business.
there was an MFS person who was at the helm of Enron's bandwidth business, Scott Yeager. So Scott Yeager made
Scott Yeager. Yeah,
so it might have been him with Sturm that kind of connected that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember meeting Scott. That I'm sure we did because he was around and his name was on a bunch of stuff. And I guess I didn't realize he was an MFS guy, so that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, by the way, Don Sturm is like the nicest guy in the world. Like he is a gentleman. Yep. I had this one funny time. We were going to buy a bunch of companies. That's what Sheldon wanted to do. And that was part of my job. So we didn't have a CFO at ICG all the way, at First World, all the way through going public. So I had the corporate finance half of the CFO role, and then we had a chief accounting officer who was on the roadshow and stuff like that. Like he was the ex public accounting guy. And so I was running around the country buying all these companies. I guess we were buying one or two companies in Houston, and Don found out that I was like going down to Houston. And Don calls me up and said, "Hey, I'm going down for a Continental." He's on the board of the Continental Airlines. "I'm going down for a Continental board meeting. Do you want to fly down with me?" And I was like, "Sure, that sounds fun." And so we had this like big Falcon, whatever it was at the time, like a big global Falcon thing, and I meet him down in Centennial, and we fly down, and he's like up in the front, like getting me a Coke, and then at one point we're on the flight, and it's a big plane. He's got a bedroom in the back, and I had been on a couple of private planes before, because when you're on a road show for Morgan Stanley, you fly around on these private planes because it's the only way you can get to like 3 cities in one day. So it was not a relaxed experience. It was just like convenience. But at one point during this flight, it's only Denver to Houston, it's only a few hours, but he's like, "I'm going to go lie down for a little bit." And he goes into the back, and I'm just sitting there, and there's no one else there. And I'm just like, there's the pilots obviously up front, but there's no one else. And I'm just like, what the F am I doing? Like, where am I? But anyway, he was a super sweet guy. So that was, the sort of the early days of First World, where and eventually Verado. And we took the company public in 2000, and that was like my job, right? Was to like organize and manage that process, lead the process to hire the bankers, lead the whole process to write the S1. We took in money from Lucent, SAIC, and someone else. I can't even think of who it is at the time. Sort of concurrent to the IPO. I negotiated, I think it was $275 million in total. I negotiated all of those deals to come in concurrent with the IPO at the IPO discount, and then go public. And we went public on March 8th of 2000.
So you got out
2 days before the market hit its high.
Wow!
And sadly for us, the stock kind of came down before I could get out, right? I mean, I don't know if I would have been smart. I didn't have a lot of. I mean, I had a decent amount because I was seniorish, but I was not old enough to have negotiated hard for that stock. So, but I don't know if I would have been smart enough to actually sell the stock. I do remember, we, like a lot of companies do, we had a chance for employees to buy into the IPO, and I remember a couple people being like, "I'm going to take a mortgage on my house. Like, this is awesome." And I was just like, I don't give financial advice, but just saying, your salary bonus and stock options like all come from this place. Like, maybe you don't want your house to be on the line, but
but those aren't conversations people would have. I mean, even if you feel that way, you don't know if it's your place, and
right.
Well, if it does, quadruple in value, and you told someone not to do it,
then you're like,
that's not right either. So.
And by the way, the stock went up, right? And I actually remember Sheldon had this deal where if the stock was above a certain price for a certain period of time, he'd get this like pretty big cash bonus. And I think we were like days away from, and it was big. I mean, we're talking like 20 million in cash. I mean, it's all public, which is why I can talk about it. And the stock was up for a while until sort of the overall market went down, and then of course at some point we missed a quarterly number, and then Sheldon ended up being asked to leave, and
But there's also everything else going on I mean,
I mean, you talk about
no
it in
one's
your book,
immune.
right? Like this
Yeah.
free fall, right? I mean, it was,
Yeah.
it was crazy heady times, which seemed like it wasn't going to last, and then it didn't last. And when it came crashing down, it crashed down really hard.
So what did you do as the market just fell apart?
I don't know why they thought that I knew what I was doing, and so most of the senior management got fired. And Enron had sold their stake at this point. So Texas Pacific Group had bought Enron's stake. And so there was a big meeting with David Bonderman, who was the head of TPG, Don Sturham, and a bunch of other people to try to decide what to do. And they brought McKinsey in to like tell them what to do. And
Because they had a lot of money to pay McKinsey.
yeah, no, I mean, it was like $1 million a month, maybe. I mean, it was a big project. And McKinsey came in, and I became friendly with those guys, and they would spend like every Monday in my office, sort of being like, okay, here's what we're thinking. What about this? What about that? And by that point I was running. I mean, I had a group of like 10 or 12 people that were like the analytical group, essentially, the kind of stuff you might have AI do for you now. But I had a team of people like run the models and all that kind of stuff. And so they were like, could you do this? Can we look at that or whatever? And ultimately, over a series of months, they decided that we should sell all of our assets other than our data centers. And so that included the telephony business. We had a cabling business, like an install business that was based out of Portland. And then we had a bunch of other internet assets that weren't data centers. And they decided we should sell all those. For some reason, they put me in charge of all that. They called it discontinued operations. They put me in charge of it. And my job was to run it, to have it lose less money, and then to sell it probably in pieces. And so that's what I did. I took it on. I mean, they had a new management. They were going to go do this data center thing. I remember not like necessarily thinking that was sort of the right direction, and I'll come back to that in a second. But so I ran this business, and I spent. I mean, you'll appreciate this because I know that this type of thing you would totally do yourself. I spent like every bill. I was like, every bill comes through me, and I flew out to California. I had a whole meeting with the CLEC business, and I was like, told them what the numbers were. Here's where we are. Like, we got to work through this. And I did the same thing. The cabling business was making money, but I did the same thing in the cabling business. And then the internet business was like a bunch of random assets. So there was no like headquarters for that. But I was like, every bill comes through me before it gets paid. And I spent one day a week in the accounts payable room at ICG or at First World Verado, because I wanted to go through every bill. And some of the telecom bills were like 200 pages, right? I mean, this was like sorting through mud to figure out why we were spending. I mean, this was a series of businesses that were losing like $6 or $7 million a month. And over the course of like eight or 9 months, we got that down to like maybe $2 million a month. I mean, it wasn't zero, but to something. And then I started sort of selling those businesses off, and we sold the cabling business. It was pretty easy to sell. We sold that pretty quickly. And then we sold the CLEC business. And then actually I wanted to make a bid for the internet assets. And I remember approaching the CEO about it, and he was like, basically like, you're too conflicted. Like, essentially to me sounded like he was saying, I don't trust you. You're going to give me, you're not going to give me a good offer, and I had thought about what the offer was going to be and sort of how I was going to structure it. And I talked to some folks about it, and I was like, all right, fine. Like, fuck you. So I sold that business in a couple of pieces, because we had some like essentially consumer internet assets, and we had some hosting stuff. So we sold the hosting stuff to one group, and we sold actually two groups, and then we sold the internet access business to another group. And then they were like, great, so we'd like you to stay and be VP of corporate planning. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I don't
Well, you probably were getting a taste of making decisions, right? You were getting a taste of owning, even though you were looking to dispose of those. Once you get a taste for really running things and making your own decisions and living with outcomes, it's hard to go back into a, you know, kind of a corporate group and,
Oh yeah.
you know,
I mean, the funny thing is, the step that I took in my career was kind of a step back from that. Eventually, it's step forward. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that the entirety of that organization was like 250 people. There was a call center, operations involved with it and stuff like that. So it was a little inflated in terms of total number of people. Actually, maybe more than that if you include the. That was probably after we sold the cabling business, because there was probably 100 people in the cabling business as well. And it was, I don't know, $55 million business. Like it was a lot to run as a relatively young person, and a great experience of like, how do you get your hand around operations? But I knew I wanted to leave. And so I basically said, look, let me think about your role. And I had a little bit of time because I had some money tied up, like a bonus tied up in getting all the way to close on the last asset. And so I knew that was happening. But by the time I'm selling the last piece, there wasn't a lot to do. And I remember spending that was the summer of 2001. And I spent the whole summer, there was a group of people that I was close to, a bunch of guys who were like at Cisco, and they knew they were out. And so we would go play basketball every day at lunch, which is funny if you knew how short I was. But we'd go play basketball at lunch, and then they all had these like expense accounts, and they'd be like, let's go grab lunch. So we'd go do these like 2-hour play basketball, go have lunch kind of things. I was just waiting, right? I mean, for the
Yep.
stuff to sell. But in the meantime, I'm like, what do I want to do? So I had a bunch of friends from Morgan Stanley who'd gone into
So now it's
into VC.
2001.
2001. Summer of 2001.
Yeah.
Or more like spring 2001. It's probably a better way of saying it. And so I was like, hey, venture capital sounds cool. I don't really know anything about it, but I think let me see what I can do. So I called up Rob Mintz, who's this lawyer who has since passed away, but was a real mentor of mine, and Mike Platt, who you know from Cooley, who was the senior associate on our deal when we went public at Verado.
Wow.
And I just said, hey, I'm trying to meet some VCs. Like, can you introduce me? And so first guy who said yes was Kyle Lefkoff. Always appreciate that. And he and I met for coffee. I guess I had previously met Jack Tankersley when I was still at ICG.
Yep.
And so I spent a little bit of time with him, also kind of just talking about like what are my options here.
And just for those two names, Jack Tankersley was one of the very early venture capitalists in Colorado as a partner with Steve Halstead, and then broke off from Centennial and formed Meritage. Meritage. And then you mentioned Kyle Lefkoff, who still is a practicing VC to this day.
Yeah.
Boulder Ventures.
Really successful firm. Yeah.
For lots of years, and kind of, steady as it goes kind of firm. They haven't raised large sums of money, but they're probably up to Fund 9 right now, and still active, and transitioning to kind of a next generation set of partners. So
they brought in Kishan Manad, who's fantastic, who they're going to ultimately transition over to. The history of this is super interesting, and I'll just plug our last podcast because we talk about the history more broadly of venture in Colorado. Because so if listeners are interested, like that's actually a pretty nice way of getting a summary of that. But I'm incredibly grateful for these people for sitting down, because not everyone I reached out to had time for me,
especially in that era. Because the sky was literally falling everywhere in that time frame. So most people were behaving in ways that they're in survival mode.
Absolutely.
And trauma. People were in trauma, and by survival mode, I don't mean just trying to keep their business together. They were trying to keep from personal bankruptcies. Some of them trying to keep from going into jail or other types of liabilities. So
absolutely. It was triage everywhere, right? And I was fortunate. So one of the people Mike Platt introduced me to was Brad Feld. Brad's super busy. I get on his calendar for 3 months later. And I'm like, okay, let's see how this goes. So I'm meeting other people, and it's me. So I've got a spreadsheet, and I've got a list of everyone I'm meeting and everyone I want to meet and who might know them. And so I'm having all these, doing these networking things. And eventually 3 months rolls around. And so I know a little bit about Brad, and I'm like, okay, well, first question is, what do you wear to something that's not an interview, but sort of an interview with Brad, right? And so, I'm dressed today in jeans and sneakers.
What was Brad's persona at that point? Because that was pretty early in Brad's journey as well.
I mean, he's right, because he had moved here only in like 96, 97, right?
I didn't
So
realize he was here that long.
he's long-haired. He's like kind of crazy. I didn't expect him necessarily to be wearing shoes. It just like he had this throne in the conference room. This is
My first, he just brought up a memory. I don't know if this is a good memory, but my first time, I think, meeting Brad, maybe it was the second time, but he did have sandals on and his toenails were bright red.
that sounds exactly like
And I
that.
couldn't meet with him again for 2 more years for that reason alone. So I'm like, I don't know what that's all about, but I'm just not used to that.
And you remember, like the telecom days, I'm sure you guys were like this at level 3. Like we were very much like slacks and button-down shirts,
Yeah.
right? And I knew it was more casual in Boulder, but like that was what I was used to wearing. That was like what you wore. And so I'm like, all right, I don't want to be too casual because I don't want to like offend him, but I don't want to be too dressed up because I don't want him to think I'm too stuffy. Anyway, I end up in this room with Brad. I think I probably wore something terrible, like a short sleeve dress shirt because I thought that was more casual or something. I mean, whatever. This is 2001. And
was he SoftBank at the time? Was it Mobius at
no,
the
this
time?
was still SoftBank
Okay.
Venture Capital. And they had raised the big fund, right? So they had it might have been 1.5 billion at that point.
Which is, I mean, by today's standards, that's a big amount of money. By that day, it was
Colossal.
colossal.
It was crazy. And you know, Brad's like distracted, like practically on his computer. I mean, and so we have this like very quick meeting, and at the end he says, "You know, we're actually going to hire a new associate. Why don't you like I'll put your name in that process?" And I was like, "All right, I guess that's all I can ask for." And that was actually good things. That I had a couple of other firms that I had talked to about it, and one in particular, and this just irks me because maybe I just have a chip on my shoulder because I never did get like an MBA or anything like that. And I remember them saying, "We only hire associates that have MBAs." And I was like, "Yeah, I get that, but you know, I just ran like a $55 million business, 250 people reported to me like, you know, last week. Do your MBAs have that kind of experience?" And they're like, "Sorry, we just, you know, we only really hire out of these schools and whatever." They're like, "Hey, if you're interested in being an analyst." And I was like, I had 10 analysts who reported to me again like a week ago. Like that doesn't really make sense. So I was happy at least that they were open to it. So I get into this process. I have a whole bunch of interviews for SoftBank. The thing I love about this story is we get to the very end. I was one of 2 finalists. And Brad wanted to hire the other guy, and everyone else wanted to hire me. And thank God Brad is Brad.
And you don't remind him of that ever, do you?
He reminds me of that. And again, the context, I mean, Brad is like one of my absolute closest friends.
Yeah.
He's, you know, this incredibly important person in my life, my business partner, everything. And, but Brad being Brad was like, all right, if everyone else thinks this Seth guy is the guy, we'll hire him instead. And so they hired me at SoftBank. I showed up. They had this like summer boondoggle thing. So I went and did that for a week somewhere in like Northern California. And then my first day at SoftBank Venture Capital, September 7th, 2001.
Oh.
My timing's amazing. And so obviously September 11 happens 4 days later, and we are grounded, right? So we're this outpost in Colorado, Brad, and he had 2 other associates, I guess, at the time. 2 or maybe even 3. And we're all in Colorado. And then the whole main office, who I had met a little bit, but through the process, but not really, right? And I didn't really know anyone there. And we couldn't travel for months and months, right? Because everyone was grounded, and then we were sort of worried about travel, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, eventually that cleared out. But it's like triage city, right? Because Brad was on 30 boards at the time. All these companies weren't working out. And like my job was to like parachute into companies and like figure out whether there was any value there and how to get value out of them, usually skinning them down a little bit. So much so that my nickname became the Angel of Death. Because when Seth showed up, like it was not a good sign for your business because everyone already knew that it wasn't working. Like the bubble had burst.
Yeah.
But like my job was to help work them out.
I mean, this was .bomb, era, because I'm sure pretty much everything Brad was invested in would have been .com. There were a couple exceptions like data center managed services, but it was probably 95%. What you think of as .com, which was at that point in the throes of .bomb.
That was terrible. And I mean, I knew what I was getting into, right? I mean, my joke when I sometimes tell the story is like, I mean, I showed up at the party. The keg. It's not just the keg was dry. Like the police had come and gone, right? Like there's like some dude sleeping in the corner, passed out. Like it was over, and I knew that. But I was like, this is my way into venture. I didn't have kids. I was single and didn't have kids at the time, and I was like, this is my
How
shot
many
to do
venture
this.
capitalists do you think there were in Colorado at the time?
I mean,
30?
no, not even
20?
I think there might.
I don't
have been,
mean firms. I mean individuals.
Yeah, no, I mean individuals. I mean, I think there were probably, I mean, if you include all the analysts and stuff like that, there's probably 30. Because Centennial was still running. Meritage was up and running at that point. Sequel Venture Partners was around. Vista had not started. Right, Vista came and went during this whole period. So yeah, there was maybe 30 people who were in venture. So I didn't realize like how ridiculous it was to get a job in venture in Colorado. I just thought like, oh well, venture sounds interesting. Let me see what I can do. And of course, Brad hired me to be an associate for there was a 2-year program, and so I was just like, all right, I'll figure something else out to do in a couple of years.
It has been a little bit humbling to everything you went through to end up as an associate at a venture firm, or no?
No. I mean, I took I had offers at the time to go do either corporate development because I had a much more corporate development experience than sort of the normal person my age. I mean, I'd done on the buy and sell side, and especially if you included some of the stuff I worked on at Morgan Stanley. I mean, 100 deals maybe. I mean, a lot, and at least 50 where I was the actual like in the room principal negotiator on the buy or sell side, because I did a lot of sell side as well.
Probably 3/4 of those jobs were disappearing in real time.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff was going away.
It was just so it was kind of a game of musical chairs where someone took 3/4, or more of the chairs out of the room, and everyone's standing around saying, "Okay, how do you find a chair?" I mean, it was literally that destructive.
I mean, that was definitely going on. I was lucky, and I had, I think, 2 offers at the time to go run corp dev groups for larger companies, basically. And then I had a couple of other companies that wanted me to be like a general manager for like a line of business. One in particular was like this sort of big kind of technical consulting company thing. And that was potentially interesting. Would have paid a lot more than I made it at SoftBank, but I was like, I kind of want to try this venture thing. I was still in my 20s, so I was like, I can.
That's amazing. You're still in your 20s, and all the ground we already covered.
Yeah, no, it's tiring to even think about. But yeah, no, it's true. I was 29 when I joined SoftBank, and so I was like, I think I want to try this, and it ended up being. I mean, it was hard. So I went from having a group of 10 analysts to do modeling exercises with and things like that to like, we didn't have any analysts at SoftBank. I wasn't. I mean, I was an associate, but I did my own analysis. So I effectively was the analyst as well. And I had never modeled a cap table, so I had to like learn how to model cap tables. And then I did all my own modeling work, right? And the big thing for me was I took a pay cut, right? Because I was both making more money at Verado and would have made even more money if I'd gone to one of these other jobs. But I thought of it as like an investment in my own career.
And then what a hell of an investment
that turned out to be. Good investment. I'll tell the very quick story from here because it's, we could talk about, we'll dig into whatever you want. But, 2 years became 3. They're like, well, maybe you should stay. 3 became 4. Then they made me this like super junior associate. Super junior partner. They called it a principal. And there was a class of associates that had become principal before me. And so in 2005, it was now renamed Mobius Venture Capital because we wanted a little distance from SoftBank, the Japanese company, which had been a big investor, but was not a controlling entity. And so they'd renamed themselves Mobius Venture Capital. And they went out to raise another fund. And all of the principals in that very first class were in the offering documents back when you had to have like a formal offering document to raise venture capital. And so I wasn't even senior enough to be in that. Like it was like a total afterthought. And I was like, I don't know. At that point I was married. We'd had our first kid. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work for me. And so I went to Brad and sat down with him and I just said, hey, I'm not quitting today, but I just want you to know, like, I'm not going to stay at Mobius. It's just not going to work for me. Like, I'm going to get a chance to do 1 or 2 deals in this fund. Like, I'm going to be 40 before I'm a partner. It's funny how you go from being like 29 and you start, and now I'm like this is 2005, so I'm 33, and I'm like, I just don't see it. This is going to be 5 more years before I get even a chance at sort of doing something here. I got to figure something else out. And Brad said, actually, fundraising isn't going great. I don't think we're going to raise a fund as Mobius. Been thinking about doing something on my own. Would love to keep working with you. What do you think? And I was like, well, I think that'd be awesome. And so we had a series of conversations. We ended up pulling in Jason Mendelson and Ryan McIntyre from California, who were our partners.
Okay, so you had already known them. They were,
yeah.
So tell me, like, your first interactions with Jason and how you build a relationship there.
Did he put you up to this?
No. And your first ones with Ryan, and because the 4 of you made up Foundry Group. So tell us the backstories of those relationships.
It just because people listening to this won't know this, I'm just going to start with Jason is one of my closest friends. I hated him when we first met, and he hated me. He was the general counsel for Mobius. Or SoftBank Venture Capital at the time. He was running in a million directions. And I think that the overall level of deal competency amongst maybe everyone, but certainly most of the associates at least, was not high. And so the first thing I was doing at SoftBank was helping Ryan on a deal that became Postini, which ended up being a big exit. Google bought it for nearly $1 billion, right as we were fundraising for Foundry, which was great. And so I got to meet Ryan that way because Ryan was had this like technology background. Of course, is a great, now a great investor, but was still kind of getting up to speed on that. But he didn't have a deal background. And Brad, who was close with Ryan, was like, hey, Seth, would you mind helping Ryan out on this deal? They're merging this company and we're investing into this thing called Postini, and they just need someone to like shepherd the deal essentially. And I thought, okay, well, just shepherd that. Like I've done 100 M&A deals, like I can do this. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not how Jason worked, right? Jason worked with like, you do, and I remember him calling me into his office and basically being like, you do not do anything on any deal for any reason without running it by me. And I'm like, okay. Like, I'm sorry, but I thought that was what I was supposed to do here. And, I don't know who else is here, but like, I've done like 100 of these. And he's like, I don't care who the fuck you are. Like, you are not doing it. He was, and then, I mean, to his credit, like a day or two later, he called me back and said, okay, at least you were like the work that you did was competent, but you don't do that again. But we butted heads a bunch, so much so that so I started in September, and that December, in my review, Brad said, as part of my review, you need to figure out how to work better with Jason. And so I went out, and I think he said the same thing to Jason.
Well, what I'm shocked about that is that Brad actually gave someone a review. I didn't think that's.
I think he had to, right? I mean, we had an HR debate. We don't have that. We never had that at Foundry, but we had it at SoftBank. And so I remember going out to that holiday party that first year, and I remember, I think it was like a fancy place. Maybe I was in a tuxedo. I don't remember, but I was dressed up. And I remember Jason saying to me, I could actually picture him. I hope he hears this. But I remember him saying, nice suit. And it was Jason's way of saying. You
even have the way you said nice suit is exactly how Jason talks.
Of course.
That's good.
Again, Jason's like one of my best friends. I spend so much time with him. Absolutely. But I remember in that moment thinking, this is Jason saying, I want to make this work. Mm-hmm. And so I can be hard-nosed, but I was like, I get it. Like Jason's the general counsel of SoftBank. Like I need to make this work. And so we kind of repaired that. Ryan and I always got along because everyone gets along with Ryan. He's like the nicest guy in the world. And of course we had started in this relationship where it was like, I was essentially his associate, right? Like I was helping him. So that was kind of my first interactions with both those guys. So in the summer of 2006, so we decided we're going to do something. And it was going to be something, it wasn't going to be Feld Ventures. It was going to be something that, sort of we all did. And in the summer of 2006, Jason moves out and Ryan and his wife, Catherine, move out. And we starting to work on like, well, what is this going to be? We're still in the old, at that point, SoftBank office. They had an incubator, and it was above the Superior Liquors in Superior. Right off the
remember
highway.
that. Yep.
Still drive by it. It's probably still empty. And so we're up there and we're sort of planning for what's this venture fund going to look like and what's it going to be. And I'm thankful for Brad for more things that I could possibly count or recount to you. But one of the things that I'm incredibly and in particular thankful for was he was unbelievably selfless as we set up Foundry. He was by far the person with the track record that was well known, right? Ryan had done some deals on his own, and while we were fundraising, Postini was a huge exit, so he had that as a track record. Jason had been the general counsel, and I had been an associate, and then a principal, and I had sort of quasi led a few things, but like we had to really squint to put together a track record. For me, a little less. So Jason had helped do this recap of a legal tech thing that ended up being really successful. So he had that on his track record. But Brad could have easily been like, here's how he could have dictated terms and we would have been fine. Yeah. And instead he was like, no, I want to have an equal partnership. It's really important to me. I want this to be something that we're going to do for the next 20 years of our lives. The design principle is we're going to do it for 20 years and then we're going to stop. Last one out turns the lights off kind of thing. And that was incredibly magnanimous of him to do that. And what a gift for me, right? I mean, it was my shot to be a partner at a venture firm. And so in 2007, we went and raised Foundry, the first Foundry fund. We didn't number them that way. We numbered them by the year. And it was Brad and Ryan who went on the road.
Yep.
Right.
And I really didn't know any of you guys because 2007 is the year I launched Zayo. So you would think that in this small town we would
really right on Pearl Street too, right?
Right
like,
on Pearl Street,
right there.
We would have already have been running around together. Maybe I had started to meet some of you guys through Silicon Flatirons. I started to show up at some of those events. Maybe the board meetings, and that's probably when I first got to know Brad.
When did you first meet Brad? Do you think it was at one of those? But what's your first memory of meeting Brad? Like with the painted toenails.
I would guess that to be in the 2006 timeframe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so right around the same time.
I
was trying to think when I was
2005. Somewhere there.
So I can't remember when you and I met each other exactly, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like I went from hearing your name to sort of knowing you to being friends. It just sort of all magically happened. I don't remember that moment.
So Jason reached out to me, and I think it was Ryan that was with him, not you. It was one of you two with him. And we went to, it must have been when the kitchen upstairs was just opening, and we met at like 5:30 or something, and they ordered these designer beers. And I didn't know these designer beers
definitely
were
was Ryan. That would have not been.
They were like 10% alcohol, and I didn't know that. So we had a good old time. We were really getting to know each other, drank, 3 or 4, glasses.
7:30, you're like crawling into bed. Like, what
I leave there and I get in my car and I start to drive. I'm like, I think I'm too drunk to drive. I'm like, I only had 3 or 4 beers, and then I looked like, oh, those aren't the 5% variety.
That sounds like a Jason and Ryan story, flat out. I love that.
So that was my first vivid memory of spending time with them. Although I'm sure we met prior to that.
Yeah.
So I must have met you right around
the same time. Yeah,
but it might have been in a room of 25 people, like when it's like a fire board meetings or something. Were you doing that in that era?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the nice thing about Boulder is like, everything just sort of circles around and people kind of come together. And I mean, I think of a lot of people that I know really well in Boulder, and I don't necessarily remember that exact moment where I was like, oh yeah, that's when I met so-and-so. Because so many people are at so many things, which is great.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this in my journey in the book. When we were at level 3, I mean, we thought the world revolved around us. I mean, we thought, we were we were like the Enron of like Colorado, thinking we were, everyone knows who we are and why should we care what anyone else is doing? And I remember when I left level 3 and started to realize there was so much more to this area and how embarrassed I was as to kind of the attitude we all had. And it really was.
It was heady times. And the truth is, from inside the telecom world, like level 3 was the company, right? Yeah. Like absolutely. I remember very much looking up to level 3 and what you guys had built and Jim Crow, all of this, right? So,
but I learned a lot from the example being set by you guys about, you guys wrote books on it since then. But I learned from you guys what leaning into the community was all about and how, helping others, first, and don't make it transactional, and, just trust that you'll get as much out of it as the other person, even if it feels like you're doing something to support them. And boy, that was a, turning point in my career and a maturing, it was a little late to mature in that way, but that that's when I started to realize, you got to think about things differently.
I think you and I had a similar journey in this because it's funny, I posed this question to Brad recently. I read, finally got around to reading Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, and everything in it reminded me of Brad. And I had a conversation with him where I actually asked him, I was like, or said to him, I learned this from you, and I don't know if maybe I had some inclinations in that direction. I don't think I was like that before I met Brad, right? And I think that, and Brad and David Cohen and Andrew Hyde, I mean, there's lots of people in our community that model this, but I don't think that I would be the way that I am from that perspective in terms of how I think about community, how I think about Give First. I don't think that it would have been the same. I don't think I was on that trajectory. I don't think I would have been like that.
Definitely wasn't on that trajectory, and maybe there were little elements of it here or there, but I definitely was not on that trajectory. And so even though it's funny when I think of mentors, I think of Brad as a mentor to me, not because he ever mentored me. I mean, we never had that relationship, but from a distance and observing kind of him and how he went about doing some things, I think that was as influential of a person in my career as anyone. There were people I worked, like when you're talking about the Morgan Stanley days and how many hours you work, and we would work all the time together, but I'm not sure there was ever that type of mentoring relationship. So it was valuable to me from a distance.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's amazing about it. So, and I had it both ways, right? I mean, he modeled it, but then also Brad was the closest and most important mentor I've ever had in my life. I mean, when people sometimes ask me like, hey, how do you learn venture capital? Like, how can I be better at this? And I'm like, I'm really not the person to ask. Like, I literally, I was an apprentice to one of the best venture capitalists of our entire generation, and that's how I learned venture. Like, that's not really a repeatable thing.
Yeah.
And I just had this great fortune of trailing Brad around for years, right? I went to all the board meetings he went to, everything. And that was how I learned the craft of venture capital. Of course, he modeled all sorts of different types of behavior, not just Give First, but how to show up in a board meeting, all that kind of stuff, in a way that I just absorbed over years. And then obviously some of it was very direct, where I'd actually sit down with him and say, "Hey, Brad, I'm struggling with X or Y. Like, what's your advice?" And so that's kind of unfair,
Yep.
but
So
amazing.
So Foundry Group is still has its funds. They're not over yet, but you guys have announced you're not going to raise a new fund. You're not going to pass it off to new partners, and you guys are kind of in wind down mode to some degree. I don't know if that's too strong a word. Yet you're an age where you got a lot to do in front of you.
Yeah.
How do you think about your journey as you look forward? You're an author now. You're increasingly a public figure. You have passions on the nonprofit side. You lean in on some political matters. How do you think of kind of your journey as at this point in time as you look forward?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking me at a good time, and this is probably not the only conversation we're going to have about it. Likely not on mic for all of them, but in this year, 2025, we're taping this sort of towards the end of the year, but this year, 2025, I asked myself the real question, do I want to do something structured after Foundry? And like you said, Foundry's, we have a few more investments to make, so it's sort of all systems normal at the moment, but we'll be winding down over time, and venture funds are notoriously long-tailed, so there'll be plenty of work to do, but it'll get less and less. And so this year I asked myself whether I wanted to do something structured or not after this. And having spent some real time sort of thinking about it and trying a few different ideas on, the answer I came to was absolutely yes, right? I have trouble shutting my mind down. It's not a very clean place up there. It's just lots of things bouncing around. And I just don't think that I'm ready to be no, I'm not going to do something next. And so that was 25, and I've kind of outlined for myself 26. I want to start exploring and hopefully come up with at least some structure around what do I want that to look like. And so the answer sitting here today is I don't know. I've had some people approach me about some different roles, and I've got some ideas about what attributes I'd like that to have, and what flexibility, and and because I still am responsible in part, along with my partners, for managing Foundry, like that continues to be my priority. So the other things need to kind of fit into that.
Yep.
Obviously, I love writing, right? I wrote a book a couple years ago. I've got my next book's coming out in like 3 weeks from when we're taping this. And so that I enjoy. There'll be other books, I'm sure, because it's a process I like. And it kind of feeds, it quiets my mind, for lack of a better. I don't know if you found that when you were writing, but my mind is a dirty place. It's just like constantly stuff bouncing around. And when I was writing, I found I got into a real flow state, and just like I wasn't thinking about.
I want to
other
write a
things.
book from that perspective. The one I did was labor. I mean, hardcore labor, something I felt compelled to do, but because of all of the fact-based material in there that I had to get right, because I knew whoever was going to read a particular page knew the story a lot better than I did. So, for me, it was a lot of work. But other stuff I do is soothing in the way you describe, where because I think that you put it well. I think people like you and me, there's so much that goes on in your head that if you don't find a way to channel it, it will get the better of you.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I guess I'd throw it out there. I'm going to throw it out to you in private later, but like, I am starting this exploration, and I'm seeking feedback from friends, not just on like, Seth, what should you do? Less that, in fact, and more just sort of like, how should I think about 2026 if my goal is to come up with some, I don't want to say resolution, but with some real concrete ideas about sort of what next looks like.
Yep.
So I've been thinking about that a lot.
And I'm probably a pretty good person to talk to on that. I mean, it's your journey, and you got to come up with your answer. But the nice thing is, I recently went through that myself, and I was letting go of Zayo. I kind of knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to go run another company or start another company, but I also knew I didn't want to go and work on my golf game and just hang out. I wanted to be very intellectually engaged. I wanted to be relevant. So there was this period of fear that I was going through. It's okay, is that even plausible? Can you carve out a new chapter in your life that you feel has kind of a sense of purpose, meaning, intellectual stimulation? Can you even do that? Is that even an option? Especially since I had no idea what that might be. And we won't get into that now, but fast forward 3 or 4 years, maybe even 4 or 5 years now, and I couldn't be more happy with the way that journey has gone. Yet it was, the starting point of it was, I don't know what's next.
Yeah, it's a really interesting position to be in. So no, I'm going to take you up on that, because I already had you in mind as someone I want to talk to about, like, how do you start exploring that journey? It's an interesting place to be. My kids are just kind of getting out of, my oldest are going to graduate from college this coming year. I have one, our youngest is still in high school, but about to be going to college. And so, there's a little bit more flexibility around place, for example, and things like that. But of course, I love Colorado, and I love, we live in Longmont, Boulder, and my wife does redevelopment work down in downtown Longmont. She also owns the bookstore in one of the buildings she redeveloped. So like, there's some things holding us to this place as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot about, like, how do I kind of balance that?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And fortunately for us, our place, Colorado, is something that we can have a lot of pride in, that there's a future to continue to shape in the areas that come natural to people like you and me. So we have a nice canvas to paint on.
Yeah, it's a pretty spectacular place, exactly. And we're very fortunate to, like, also be involved in some interesting things, right? I mean, in your case, Sundance and Roots, and some of the sort of local political things that are going on as well. Like, that makes it kind of exciting to be here, right?
Yep, and we've got some things that are going on related to Sundance that I'll bring up to speed on, that hopefully picks up a ton of traction. That is pretty inspiring.
I'm really excited for that too.
We're working with the Sundance, up to including the board chair, on some ideas that would be, if they go forward with them, would be extraordinarily interesting.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, and thank you for all the work that you and Cindy have done to get Sundance here and Roots here, and like all of that makes our community more vibrant.
Yep.
And I love that.
So let's, before we close this out, we kind of skipped all these years of you as a venture capitalist. Any one or two kind of deals that, pop up that, you reflect on and say, these are two of the more interesting deals that you've been part of, or, or learning experiences from them, or just anything that jump out at you? And if you don't have any
No,
that jump
I
out,
mean, there's so many, right? I mean, we,
they don't necessarily have to be the ones that worked out the best. It could be just the ones that were
well, the first one that
ones.
pops to mind actually didn't work out. And I had the opportunity to co-found a company with Neil Robertson.
Neil Robertson is?
He was a longtime entrepreneur. He had founded a company called Service Metrics, which was sort of back in the kind of bubble days, a company that helped essentially measure web traffic, to give a quick description of it. Very successful, was sold to a data center business called Exodus Communications. I'm sure you know them well.
Yes.
I imagine Level P probably sold a ton of bandwidth to them. And it was a really, really successful outcome. And he was super young when that happened. He was in his 20s.
And Exodus was probably the most appropriately named entity of that era.
Absolutely, right? I mean, well, exactly. And so Neil and I ended up founding this business called Trada, that was working in search optimization. And it was a really, really good idea. It was sort of a marketplace business before that was a real thing. And we just, man, it failed. And when I think back on it, like we had Google as an investor, like we had everything lined up perfectly. And we like had one dot on the board and we drew a line up to the right and we started spending against that, and we just didn't. We needed to do some more experimenting to really understand what our go-to-market was. And that's my most memorable deal because I felt so much ownership in it because I helped actually come up with the idea, literally sitting in the conference room in the old Foundry office with Neil, and I have so much regret over like, God, I wish we could just do it again, right? And Neil and I sometimes talk about it. Because I think we both sort of feel the same way. Like just, I don't know if it was rookie mistake or hubris or whatever, but it just was like, man, I wish we could have done that again. And then the other deal that really always comes to mind for me was AdMeld. It was the very first venture deal I did as a partner at Foundry. We co-led it with Spark Capital out of Boston. This was back in the days with like true seed rounds. It was $1 million at a 3 million post. And that company essentially invented real-time bidding. So internet advertising, and they were from AOL and some other Fox, some other places. And it was a really interesting business to be in. It taught me, I didn't know a ton about internet advertising at the time. It taught me a lot about that. And I've made a handful of other investments because of the knowledge that I learned there. And it was my first 10x investment, right? It was the first like real huge outcome. It was actually the first big outcome for our first fund. Zynga was on a great trajectory, but we hadn't really exited. We'd done some secondary, and it was way before the Fitbit IPO. And so the first real money that we ended up returning at Foundry was AdMeld, and we had invested 10 and change, 10 or $11 million into AdMeld. And it was sort of like the deal that, like when you're in VC, the number of people that actually end up getting a 10x outcome, it's actually not that many. Like it's really hard to do that. And you hear about all these big deals, but they're actually relatively few and far between. And that finally, I think, gave me the confidence as a partner to believe that I knew what I was doing. And that was a really important deal for that, both because it was pretty clear early on that it was working. And so I sort of knew, or at least medium on, that it was working. And we exited it within like 5 or 6 years. And so it really felt, Google bought it. And it really felt like it was sort of validating. Like, okay, I know what I'm doing. Like, so you're never quite sure, right? I mean, you go raise this fund and, we're hoping it works out. And, we were probably 2 funds in at that point. So we had raised the 2007 and 2010 fund by the time we exited AdMeld. And I just, I really think of that as sort of like the deal that made me, I don't want to say put me on the map because I don't think I'm on any maps, but it was the deal that made me feel confident that I knew what I was doing.
Well, I only did one deal alongside Foundry, and it looks like we might have a big outcome.
Knock on wood.
It's going really well at this point.
Now that the SEC is back open, right? I mean, we go on file and then the SEC closes for whatever it was, 5 weeks, and you're like, oh, okay. Our financials are going to be stale, so we got to go refresh those.
I know, got delayed by a little bit.
Yeah, knock on wood, that'll go well.
And then two or three observations around founders. Like what's with all the deals you've been involved with, all the founders that you met, what two or three characteristics would you want to emphasize? They don't necessarily have to be positive characteristics. They could also be avoid this, or or be more like that. What strikes you as what's most important when it comes to founders?
I'll go with the positive because these are the two things that come to mind. I'll be curious your reaction to both of these. I mean, one is product obsession, right? Like really, like you want to live, breathe, eat, sleep, customers and product, right? You have to have that passion. And I think our best founders really felt like they were almost like righting a wrong in the world in some way, in this little area that they were working on. And then the other thing is like a deep comfort with the unknown. And I think, one of the challenges I've found in some founders that, have struggled is that they want some sort of roadmap. Just tell me if I hit this, what happens? If I do this, what happens? And that just doesn't work, right? You have to have this incredible ability to embrace the unknown. You just sort of like walk off the cliff, so to speak, just assuming that you'll figure out how to get the parachute going on the way down.
Yeah.
And I think it sounds maybe obvious, but I feel like I regularly enough have conversations with founders, not necessarily in the Foundry portfolio, just people that, call me or that I end up interacting with. And it's really clear, like they need too much of a roadmap. And maybe I should start saying to them, like, if you're not comfortable with this like deep sense of unknown and maybe being a couple months from being out of cash and just having to figure it out, like that's how this world works.
Yeah, and that's not something someone could hear that advice and say, "Oh, that's good advice. I'll be that type of person." It's like, no, you either are that type of person, or you're not. And if you're not, it's probably not cut out. But the word obsession, I think, is a very good word. I definitely would emphasize that. I don't know that I would put product obsession there because it could be, you could put different words in there. But
yeah, I think that's fair.
The obsession to do something of significance, and I like that you almost feel like, I've got to take something that's wrong and make it right, whatever your thing is. And, I think that obsession is, I can't think of a single, really successful founder who didn't have this obsession or that needed everything to be clear before they got going. It's like, whatever you think you're going to do, you're probably going to end up doing something different.
Exactly. And by the way, I mean, you referenced this as well. Like you're about your days, both at ICG and at Level 3, like you're going to spend a ton of time doing this, right? And it won't always look like it's working. And so you have to have that drive because you need to just like every day get up and be like, I'm going to go tackle this.
Yeah.
Even when it looks like it's not going to work.
And then here's one more, and then I think we're well over our hour and a half, which is awesome. One other thing is from a venture investor standpoint, the most obvious thing is the most right thing. It's so obvious that every investor says it, but what I've learned is very few really mean it, and that is the founder you're backing, the management team you're backing is, they got to be pursuing the right market opportunity, big one. They have to have a really good idea, but so much comes down to who is that founder, who is that founding team, who are they, who are you backing, are they really going to see this thing through? And if they can't, it's not going to be because they didn't try hard enough. They're going to see it through. And I think we all kind of say that as investors, but what I've come to realize even for myself is, I violated that rule a few times, and you just can never violate that rule. If you can't get totally behind the team, you won't always be right because, not every team can will something to be successful, but it takes that type of willpower.
Yeah. And it's such an important point, Dan, because it's so easy to get enamored with a market or an idea and be like, I don't know about the team, but like, I really like this idea, right? And I think this is a massive market. Like, we'll just figure it out, right? And that's like, you kind of need both.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks so much. I thought we were going to spend a lot more time about your venture experiences, but I'm glad we spent a ton of time in the first half because I think we got to know you better by you talking about kind of those formative years. I really enjoyed, your introductions to Brad and Jason and Ryan and how that came together, and a little bit of a teaser about what's next for you is quite fun as well.
This
So
is really fun.
love this
Dan.
conversation.
Yeah, I loved it. I love the telecom stuff too. And there were, I mean, when I read your book, I was just like, it was a page turner for me because like I knew many of the stories, not all of them in exact detail. And I met Bernie Everett from World, and people we didn't even talk about in the podcast. But a bunch of these people were people that like crossed through somewhere between Morgan Stanley or ICG. My time, and it obviously we had direct crossover, not working together at the same time at ICG, but with that one business, and it's just fun to get a chance to talk about it.
It's fun to talk about where you can have smiles on your face when. Well, at the time, it wasn't all smiles.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. 25 years later, it's a little easier to talk about it.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. Check out Stretch, the new song from Dan Caruso, with music by Jason Mendelsohn, available now on all streaming services. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Kendall Weinberg, with support from Gibson Siegert.